The iron door of the Marinwood County Jail made a nasty rattling sound. Maverick Thorne shuddered. He'd been used to that sound for 20 years, but today it meant something special. Freedom. He had already endured 20 long years for a crime he had always insisted he did not commit. The irony was not lost on those who knew his story. Tell us where you are watching this video from today, as it helps us to know how far our videos get. Thanks. As the sun began to rise, casting an almost surreal light over the crime scene, the police moved with a sense of urgency. The usually serene neighborhood was now a hive of activity, with officers in crisp uniforms and forensic teams in their telltale white suits. The once peaceful street was now lined with police tape, a stark reminder of the violence that had occurred within those walls. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the truth was far more intricate and disturbing than anyone could have initially guessed. The story of Maverick Thorne is one of wrongful imprisonment, of a life stolen and a reputation tarnished. It's a tale of a man who, despite the odds, never gave up on the hope of proving his innocence. But it's also a story of betrayal, of a woman who, for reasons yet to be fully understood, had accused him of a heinous crime. The questions began to pile up almost as quickly as the evidence did. Why had Octavia accused Maverick in the first place? What had driven her to such a desperate act? And most importantly, who could have had a motive to kill her and her husband in such a brutal manner? In a world where trust is a fragile thing, and the line between right and wrong can blur, there was a man named Maverick Thorne. His story is one of betrayal and vengeance, a tale that begins with a single, devastating accusation. Imagine a life turned upside down in an instant, a reputation shattered, and a future stolen. This is the story of a man who endured the unimaginable, only to find himself thrust back into a world that had moved on without him. Maverick Thorne was a man who had everything, a loving wife, a promising future, and a life filled with hope. But in an instant, it all came crashing down. His wife, Octavia Baker, later known as Octavia Sterling, accused him of a heinous crime, rape. The very word sends shivers down the spine, a crime so abhorrent that it leaves no room for doubt. But in Maverick's case, it was all a lie, a carefully woven web of deceit that would change the course of his life forever. The trial was a spectacle, a media frenzy that painted Maverick as a monster. Octavia's testimony was chilling, her words painting a picture of a woman trapped in a living nightmare. The bruises on her body, the signs of a struggle, all pointed to Maverick as the perpetrator. But he stood firm, insisting on his innocence. He spoke of a wife he hadn't seen in days, of coming home early to surprise her on their anniversary. But his words fell on deaf ears. The jury believed her, and Maverick was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. As the prison gates clanged shut behind him, Maverick's world went dark. The years passed slowly, each day a reminder of the life he had lost. But amidst the despair, a glimmer of hope remained. He clung to the belief that one day, he would prove his innocence. He spent his days in the prison library, poring over books and articles, seeking any scrap of information that might help him. And it was there that he met Griffin Hayes, a man who would become his only ally in a world that had turned its back on him. Griffin was a literature teacher, a man who had also been wrongfully convicted of rape. Their bond was forged in the shared experience of injustice, a bond that would prove stronger than steel. They spent hours talking, sharing their stories, and plotting their eventual freedom. And when that day finally came, it was a bittersweet moment. Freedom was within reach, but the scars of the past would never fully heal. Maverick's release was a surreal experience. The world outside the prison walls was unfamiliar, a place that had moved on without him. He walked the streets, feeling the weight of his freedom and the burden of his past. He knew that his journey was far from over. There were questions that needed answers, and a truth that needed to be revealed. And so, with a heart full of determination, Maverick set out to uncover the truth, to confront the woman who had taken everything from him, and to seek the justice he deserved. The lines between victim and perpetrator began to blur, and the web of deceit that had ensnared him was far more intricate than he had ever known. And as he pieced together the puzzle, he realized that the journey to justice would be fraught with danger, and the cost of the truth might be higher than he was willing to pay. In the quiet of a small town, where the streets were lined with maple trees and the air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass, Maverick Thorne and Octavia Baker had built a life together. Their marriage was like a carefully crafted mosaic, each piece fitting perfectly into the next. They were the couple everyone envied, the ones who seemed to have it all. Maverick was a man of few words but many actions, always ready to lend a hand or offer a shoulder to lean on. Octavia, with her radiant smile and quick wit, was the life of every party. Together, they were a match made in heaven, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect union, there were cracks beginning to form. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible. A harsh word here, a cold shoulder there. Arguments that once ended with laughter now lingered, leaving a bitter taste in their mouths. The love that had once bound them together was slowly being eroded by the weight of unspoken words and unmet expectations. It was on a night like any other, the kind where the sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was cool, carrying with it the promise of an early autumn. Maverick had come home early, hoping to surprise Octavia with a small gift for their anniversary. But instead of the warm welcome he had anticipated, he found her in the kitchen, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears. Their argument began as a whisper, a soft exchange of words that quickly escalated into a shouting match. The words they exchanged were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. It was in the heat of this moment that Octavia made the accusation that would change everything. She accused Maverick of rape, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. The words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, as if the very room itself had turned against him. The courtroom was a place of stark contrasts. The polished wood of the benches and the judge's gavel seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of shattered lives. Octavia's testimony was delivered with a cold precision, her words painting a picture of a woman trapped in a nightmare. She spoke of bruises and tears, of a love turned sour. The jury listened with rapt attention, their faces a mask of sympathy and disbelief. Maverick stood in the dock, his hands trembling slightly as he listened to the words that were tearing his life apart. He tried to defend himself, to explain the truth, but his words were lost in the sea of doubt. The evidence was damning, even though it was circumstantial. The bruises on Octavia's body, the signs of a struggle in their bedroom, all pointed to him. And yet, he knew he was innocent. He had never raised a hand to her, never forced her to do anything she didn't want to do. But the jury didn't see that. They saw a man accused of a heinous crime, and they believed the victim. As the gavel fell and the judge pronounced his sentence, Maverick felt as if the world had come to an end. The 20 years he was sentenced to felt like an eternity, a lifetime of suffering and despair. He was led away in handcuffs, his heart heavy with anger, confusion, and a sense of betrayal. The prison gates closed behind him with a finality that seemed to echo the end of his life as he knew it. Inside the prison walls, Maverick was a shadow of his former self. The days blurred together, each one a monotonous repetition of the last. The anger and confusion that had filled him on the day of his conviction slowly gave way to a deep, gnawing despair. He spent his days in the prison library, seeking solace in the pages of books and the quiet of the reading room. It was there that he met Griffin Hayes, a man who would become his only ally in a world that had turned its back on him. Griffin was a literature teacher, a man who had also been wrongfully convicted of rape. Their bond was forged in the shared experience of injustice, a bond that would prove stronger than steel. They spent hours talking, sharing their stories, and plotting their eventual freedom. And when that day finally came, it was a bittersweet moment. Freedom was within reach, but the scars of the past would never fully heal. As Maverick walked out of the prison gates, the weight of his freedom was almost too much to bear. The world outside was unfamiliar, a place that had moved on without him. But amidst the despair, a glimmer of hope remained. He knew that his journey was far from over. There were questions that needed answers, and a truth that needed to be revealed. And so, with a heart full of determination, Maverick set out to uncover the truth, to confront the woman who had taken everything from him, and to seek the justice he deserved. But as he delved deeper into the mystery, he discovered that the truth was far more complex than he had ever imagined. The lines between victim and perpetrator began to blur, and the web of deceit that had ensnared him was far more intricate than he had ever known. And as he pieced together the puzzle, he realized that the journey to justice would be fraught with danger, and the cost of the truth might be higher than he was willing to pay. This is the story of Maverick Thorne, a man who faced the darkest of betrayals and emerged with a burning desire for justice. It's a tale of resilience, of hope, and of the unyielding human spirit. And as you listen to this story, you'll find yourself drawn into a world where nothing is as it seems, and the quest for truth is a journey that will take you to the very edge of your understanding. In Marinwood County Jail, time dragged on for Maverick Thorne. Each day was much like the last, a monotonous routine in a place designed to break spirits. His cell, small and bare, was a constant reminder of the life he'd lost. The prison sounds, the clanging doors, distant shouts, and guards' footsteps, were a relentless backdrop to his existence. Maverick's days were filled with the same unchanging routine. He woke early to the harsh light of the floodlights, endured cold showers and tasteless meals, and spent his afternoons in the prison yard, where the tension was thick and the sun felt distant. The prison library was his only solace. It was there that he met Griffin Hayes, a fellow inmate with a hauntingly similar story. Griffin, a former literature teacher, had also been wrongfully convicted of rape by Octavia Baker. Their shared experience forged a deep bond. They spent hours talking, sharing their stories, and dreaming of the day they could prove their innocence. Years passed, and the bond between Maverick and Griffin grew stronger. They became each other's support, talking about their hopes for the future and their desire for justice. Then, one day, Griffin was released. It was a bittersweet moment for Maverick. He was happy for his friend but also acutely aware of the time he still had to serve. Griffin's release marked a turning point for Maverick. He spent his remaining days in prison planning and preparing for the day he could confront Octavia and uncover the truth. When that day finally came, and he walked out of the prison gates, he felt a mix of relief and foreboding. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, driven by a burning desire for justice. In River City, Maverick reunited with Griffin, who had settled into a modest life. They talked about Octavia, now married to a wealthy architect and running a charity for abused women. The irony was not lost on them. Maverick's fury grew as he thought about the life Octavia had built on lies. They began to watch Octavia and her husband, looking for clues. Maverick noticed something off about her. She seemed uneasy, constantly looking over her shoulder. One day, she received a mysterious letter. The truth always comes out. It was clear someone else knew about her lies. Maverick's determination to uncover the truth only grew stronger. He knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, but he was ready. This is the story of Maverick Thorne, a man seeking justice in a world where truth is often buried. In the quiet, affluent neighborhood of Lakewood, Maverick Thorne and Griffin Hayes watched Octavia and Brock Sterling with the stealth of shadows. Octavia seemed uneasy, her eyes darting nervously, as if she could sense the eyes upon her. Brock, on the other hand, moved with ease, his laughter a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Griffin urged Maverick to take action. "She destroyed our lives," he said. "She doesn't get to live hers in peace." But Maverick, cautious, held back, knowing one wrong move could cost them everything. One evening, at a charity event, the crowd began to thin, and the shadows grew longer. A figure emerged, moving with a purpose that sent a chill down their spines. The figure approached Octavia, and in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, there was a struggle. The sound of a scream was lost in the night. Maverick and Griffin watched in horror as the figure struck, leaving Octavia crumpled on the ground. Their plans had been shattered. The confrontation they had so carefully planned had turned into a nightmare. Maria Gonzalez, the Sterling's housekeeper, arrived at the grand house in Lakewood on a fateful Monday morning. The house was eerily silent. She found Octavia on the bed, her throat slit, and Brock on the floor, his head bashed in. Maria dialed 911, her hands shaking. Detective Leighton Wrighton arrived at the scene. The medical examiner reported that the time of death was between 10 p.m. and midnight. The woman's cause of death was a slit throat, and the man died of blunt force trauma to the head. There were signs of a struggle, but nothing indicated a robbery. This was personal. Wrighton's team found a stack of letters in the dressing table drawer. One unsigned envelope caught his eye. It contained a piece of paper with the phrase, "The truth always comes out." The investigation deepened, and the police began to piece together the timeline of the couple's last hours. The manhunt for Maverick Thorne began almost immediately. The police linked him to the scene through security camera footage. The images showed a gray Ford belonging to Griffin Hayes, with a man who looked like Maverick watching the Sterling house. The evidence was damning, and the public quickly labeled Maverick as the prime suspect. He began to uncover inconsistencies that suggested a more complex truth. The investigation was far from over, and the quest for justice had only just begun. Detective Leighton Wrighton was a man who had seen the darkest corners of humanity. His eyes, sharp and piercing, missed nothing. He was methodical, a man who believed in the power of facts and the relentless pursuit of truth. Skepticism was his shield, and it had served him well over the years. As he stood in the grand house in Lakewood, the weight of the crime scene heavy in the air, he knew that this case would be unlike any other he had encountered. Wrighton began his investigation with a thorough examination of the crime scene. The details were gruesome, but he forced himself to focus on the evidence. The stab wounds, the overturned furniture, the blood-soaked linens, all of it painted a picture of a violent and desperate struggle. But it was the note that caught his attention. "The truth always comes out," it read. The words were simple, but they carried a chilling message. As Wrighton delved deeper into Octavia's past, he uncovered a pattern that sent a shiver down his spine. 2 rape cases, both with the same modus operandi. The first had been against Griffin Hayes, a literature teacher accused by Octavia Baker, the same woman who had later accused Maverick Thorne. The similarities were too striking to be coincidental. Wrighton's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be that Octavia had fabricated both accusations? And if so, why? The more Wrighton investigated, the more his suspicion shifted toward Griffin Hayes. Griffin had been released from prison a month before Maverick, and his whereabouts were now unknown. Security camera footage showed Griffin's car near the Sterling house on several occasions. The evidence pointed to him, but something about the case didn't sit right with Wright Thorne. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends. As the investigation intensified, Griffin disappeared. He left no trace, no indication of where he might have gone. His sudden vanishing only heightened the suspicion surrounding him. Meanwhile, Maverick Thorne found himself on the run, alone and hunted. The police had linked him to the crime scene, and the public had quickly labeled him as the prime suspect. But Maverick knew he was innocent, and he was determined to clear his name. The days turned into weeks, and the manhunt for Maverick and Griffin continued. The media frenzy grew, painting a picture of a cold-blooded killer on the loose. But Wright Thorne remained unconvinced. He knew there was more to the story, a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. He spent long hours poring over case files, interviewing witnesses, and following leads. Each new piece of evidence brought him closer to the truth, but also deeper into a web of deceit and betrayal. As the investigation reached a critical point, Wright Thorne uncovered a crucial piece of information. A sealed envelope in the Griffin Hayes case file, marked to be opened only by court order, had been opened a month ago. The visitor's log indicated that it had been accessed by a lawyer named Mlan, who had recently handled Griffin's case. Wright Thorne's mind raced with possibilities. What could be in that envelope? And why had it been opened now, after all these years? Determined to find answers, Wright Thorne paid a visit to Mlan's office. The lawyer, a gray-haired man in his mid-60s, was reluctant to speak at first. But under Wright Thorne's persistent questioning, he finally revealed the truth. Griffin Hayes had approached him 3 months earlier, seeking to review his case file. Mlan's assistant had located the records, and Griffin had shown a particular interest in the testimony of one Octavia Baker. It seemed that Griffin had recognized her name from a story told by his cellmate, Maverick Thorne. Wright Thorne's mind pieced together the puzzle. Griffin had discovered the connection between Octavia and Maverick, and he had sought revenge. But where was Griffin now? And what had happened to him? The questions weighed heavily on Wright Thorne's mind as he continued his relentless pursuit of the truth. In the midst of the chaos, Maverick Thorne found himself alone and on the run. He had no one to turn to, no one to trust. The weight of the accusations against him was almost unbearable, but he held on to the hope that the truth would eventually come to light. He knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger, but he was determined to see it through. This is the story of Detective Leighton Wright Thorne, a man who refused to accept the easy answers. It's a tale of two wrongfully accused men, bound by a shared past and a relentless pursuit of justice. As you listen to this story, you'll find yourself drawn into a world where the quest for truth is a journey that will take you to the very edge of your understanding. Detective Leighton Wright Thorne had spent countless hours poring over case files, chasing leads, and questioning witnesses. The investigation into the double murder of Octavia and Brock Sterling had taken a toll on him, but he was determined to uncover the truth. Just when it seemed like the case was growing colder, a breakthrough arrived in the most unexpected way. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows stretched long across the detective's desk, Wright Thorne received a package. It was small, unassuming, and yet it carried the weight of a revelation. Inside was a flash drive, and on it, a video. The video was grainy, the lighting poor, but the figure in the frame was unmistakable. It was Griffin Hayes, his face etched with a mix of determination and sorrow. Griffin's voice was steady as he began to speak. He recounted the events of that fateful night, the confrontation that had spiraled out of control. He spoke of Brock's unintended death, a tragic accident in the heat of the moment. But it was Griffin's motive that struck Wright Thorne the hardest. Revenge and truth, he said, were his driving forces. He had sought to confront Octavia, to make her confess to the lies that had destroyed his life and Maverick's. But in the end, it had all gone terribly wrong. As Griffin's voice faded, the video ended. Wright Thorne sat in silence, the weight of the confession pressing down on him. He knew that this was the piece of the puzzle he had been missing, the key to unlocking the truth. But the revelation came with a cost. Days later, the news of Griffin's death reached Wright Thorne. His body had been found in a forest, a victim of his own hand. Beside him, a note. "Justice has been done," it read, a final testament to a man who had sought retribution for the wrongs done to him. The words were simple, but they carried a profound weight. Wright Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that Griffin's death was more than just a tragic end to a desperate man's quest for justice. It was a reminder of the complexities of human nature, the fine line between right and wrong, and the devastating consequences of deceit. The investigation had taken him on a journey through the darkest corners of the human soul, and in the end, he was left with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain, the truth, as Griffin had said, had finally come out. The lies that had shattered lives, the betrayals that had sent innocent men to prison, were now exposed. And though justice had been served in its own twisted way, Wright Thorne knew that the scars left behind would never fully heal. This is the story of Detective Leighton Wrighton, a man who had faced the darkest of truths and emerged with a deeper understanding of the complexities of human nature. It's a tale of justice, revenge, and the unyielding pursuit of the truth. As you listen to this story, you'll find yourself drawn into a world where the quest for justice is a journey that will take you to the very edge of your understanding. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, Maverick Thorne found himself standing on the precipice of a new beginning. The weight of the past, the years lost to a lie, had finally been lifted. The court had acquitted him, recognizing the injustice that had been done. It was a bittersweet victory, one marred by the knowledge that while his name had been cleared, the scars of his ordeal would remain. A suspended sentence for fleeing justice was the only stain left on his record, a small price to pay for the freedom he had fought so hard to reclaim. As Maverick navigated the complexities of his newfound freedom, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. The years in prison, the friendship forged with Griffin Hayes, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the tragic end that had befallen his friend. It was a path marked by pain and loss, but also by resilience and hope. One crisp morning, as the sun cast a golden hue over the city, Maverick found himself in a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The place was unassuming, a quiet retreat from the chaos of the world outside. It was here that he was to meet Detective Leighton Wrighton, the man who had played such a pivotal role in unraveling the tangled web of lies that had ensnared him. The cafe was filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clinking of cups. Maverick chose a table by the window, his eyes reflecting the determination that had carried him through the darkest of times. As he sat there, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. For all the hardships he had endured, he had also found allies in unexpected places. When Wrighton arrived, the two men exchanged a nod of mutual respect. There were no words needed, their shared experiences had forged a bond that transcended the usual boundaries. They ordered their drinks in silence, the weight of their thoughts hanging heavy in the air. As they sat there, Maverick spoke first. His voice was steady, filled with a quiet strength. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be free," he said, his eyes meeting Wrighton's. "But even now, I can't help but wonder, what if things had been different?" Wrighton sighed, his gaze distant. "We all have those moments, Maverick," he replied. "But the truth is, we can't change the past. All we can do is learn from it and move forward." Their conversation flowed like a river, touching on the highs and lows of their respective journeys. They spoke of the lies that had shaped their lives, the betrayals that had left them broken, and the quest for justice that had driven them forward. It was a dialogue born of shared pain and a mutual desire for understanding. As the meeting drew to a close, Wrighton's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, his expression turning serious. "Looks like I've got another case," he said, pocketing his phone. "Justice never sleeps, I suppose." Maverick nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I guess not," he agreed. "But maybe, just maybe, this time it won't take so long." As they parted ways, the weight of their shared experiences lingered in the air. Two men, shaped by lies, seeking peace in a world that often seemed devoid of it. But in their journey, they had found something more, a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the truth could still find its way to the light. In a world where truth is buried under layers of lies, sometimes justice comes not from the system, but from the broken souls it failed.